I mean, the reality is that for the first time in 32 years in this poll, it shows that Republicans are beating Democrats straight up. When you ask people a generic ballot in 32 years, it shows that Donald Trump's doing better with black voters, Hispanic voters, off the charts. But what the most important thing is, what happened last week is that what was working with female voters with Kamala Harris was that there was some feeling of joy in the air. Well, that joy is gone.
It's far from the first time we've done a video like this, and it certainly will not be the last, but there are yet more damning statistics out that may spell disaster for Kamala Harris shortly before the 2024 election cycle. And some of these poll numbers were revealed by none other than CNN, which is highly ironic, but it seems like it's also happening a lot lately. We'll give you all of those details here today. So folks, do us a big favor. If you're enjoying the content so far, be sure to hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new, especially subscribe. And why should you subscribe? Because trust me, folks, your subscription goes a long way in ensuring we can keep bringing you these videos. And by the way, it is absolutely free, so it'd be greatly appreciated. Just hit that red button down below. And with that said, let's get into some of this. We got a lot to talk about, but the main focus of this video is going to be on party identification. So this is essentially asking Americans over time, do you identify more as Republican or Democrat? And by the way, some states, not all, but some states do publish voter registration information. So you can actually look, for instance, in Pennsylvania and see, okay, in the month of, say, August, how many new Republicans registered to vote versus new Democrats. And those overall numbers, long story short, spell really bad news for Kamala Harris. Take a listen here. This one is from Gallup poll.
Right. So party ID nationally. You go to October, November of 2016, Democrats had a 3-point advantage. You go 4 years ago, Democrats had a 6-point advantage. Look at where we are today, Manu. Republicans with a 1-point advantage. A very different picture, very much mirroring what we see in the party registration numbers in those key battleground states, and Pennsylvania in particular.
And it actually just shows you, too, why Harris is doing what she's trying to do. She's trying to moderate a little bit on these issues, trying to reach those very voters, because the party registration is changing, and the demographics of the voters are changing. And those are the people she needs to attract.
Absolutely. And you know, the GOP leads by a point in party identification right now. The average when the Republican Party loses is the Democrats ahead by 8. When the Republican Party wins, the average party ID advantage for Democrats is 3. Republicans right now, Manu, are doing even better than the average when they win. If there's one little nugget that I think Republicans are really hopeful for, it's this party ID and this party registration data. It really points in a good direction for them and for Donald Trump.
Wow. That's incredible, right? So take a look at this again. On average, when Republicans win the Electoral College in this Gallup poll, and in terms of like national party ID, plus 3 points more Americans identify as Democrat than Republican, that advantage has now shifted in our favor to Trump +1. Now, you could say, oh, but the Gallup poll is inaccurate, but I would strongly contest that because we've gone over some of this data before. But when you take a look at overall party registration in the states that do publish voter registration information, that backs this up. Right? That backs up the data we are seeing, because in virtually every single swing state, Republicans are dominating the Democrats in terms of those new voter registrations. This is people who recently registered to vote as Republicans, and considering they're doing it this summer or fall, you probably know how they're going to vote. And take a listen to how CNN suggests that may be affecting some of the battleground states as we speak.
But there is a numbers problem in Arizona. There is just a mathematical complication in Arizona that other states don't have. None of the other swing states have lost Dems the way Arizona has, which is really interesting. We're talking about voter registration.
Yeah, it's honestly going to come down to the numbers, and that is why we see the Harris campaign reaching out to Republicans and reaching out to independents, not because it's a virtuous thing, but because in Arizona it is a necessity, particularly because we know 100,000 registered Democrats have left the state since 2020, which puts Democrats at a deficit, not just with Republicans by over 200,000 registered voters, but for the first time since 2020, also with independents, meaning that they have to get their numbers from somewhere.
Right, so you saw that there. And just to be clear, what you saw in the last video, we're not talking about a poll, okay? Because polls can obviously be inaccurate. It depends on how good your sample is, your methodology, etc. This is based on voter registration data that is public information in Arizona. So it's not up for debate, right? It's an objective fact that the state of Arizona since 2020 has lost 100,000 registered Democrats, because you can see that in terms of who's moving in and out of the state, etc., new registrations to vote, whatever. And by the way, that's not just an Arizona problem, because in a lot of other states, i.e. Pennsylvania, it is the same story. Republicans are overall beating Democrats in that voter registration data where this information is available. And again, that's not very subjective. That is hard public records we can look at. So the point here is this: when you scroll past all the noise and really look at the fundamentals and intangibles of this election, they seem to suggest that Kamala Harris is actually losing, and possibly losing pretty badly.
I mean, the reality is that for the first time in 32 years in this poll, it shows that Republicans are beating Democrats straight up. When you ask people a generic ballot in 32 years, it shows that Donald Trump's doing better with black voters, Hispanic voters, off the charts. But what the most important thing is, what happened last week is that what was working with female voters with Kamala Harris was that there was some feeling of joy in the air. Well, that joy is gone. She had a terrible week. She picked a pointless fight with Ron DeSantis. She was losing in the Sun Belt, and she tried to recover by going on The View, which a lot of women watch. She went on The View. You talked about it earlier. And she wanted to clarify the two most important issues that are facing these two candidates: the economy and immigration. And she bombed like Rory at the U.S. Open, and she went out there and said there was nothing she would do that would be different than Joe Biden. And she created a campaign commercial for Donald Trump. And so...
Right, exactly. And I've been saying this for a while, but when you take a look at the current state of Kamala Harris's campaign, they seem fundamentally desperate. Right? This is why all of a sudden they're changing their political strategy at the last minute. You don't just magically go from doing no interviews as your MO to doing all the interviews in the world overnight, just a couple weeks away from the election, if you think things are going fine. Clearly, they see stuff in both the public data and probably some of the private internal pollings on their end that is showing, actually, we're in a really bad spot. Yes, we need to start hitting the panic button. Yes, we need to start taking risks, throwing Hail Marys out there, just throwing anything at the wall and hoping that it sticks, because ultimately we do not seem like we are in a very strong position. Hence, like I've been saying, desperation mode for the Democrat campaign.
What is with all of this bedwetting among Democrats? Maybe it's an eternal problem, but let's take a look here. These are, of course, the Great Lake battleground states, the states we've been focusing in on. If Kamala Harris wins these three, she most likely gets to 270 electoral votes. Take a look 3 weeks ago. Harris was ahead by 2 in Pennsylvania, 2 in Wisconsin, 3 in Michigan. Look at where we are today. The race is even tighter than it was. Today, it's a 1-point advantage in Pennsylvania, 1 in Wisconsin, 1 in Michigan. Look, that's limited movement. But in a year in which this race has been so static, if we're talking 1-point movement, 1-point movement, 2-point movements, and we see movements in all three, this is the type of thing that, at least in the public polling, makes Democrats worried. And I think that the public polling in this case is reflected in some of that internal polling, some of that reporting that suggests that these Great Lake battleground states have certainly tightened a lot, where at this point they are way too close to call.
It is what you call a trend.
It is
when
a
you
trend.
See something like this over several states. When you compare this to 4 years ago, what does it look like?
Yeah, so let's take a look, and we're going to look at an average.
And by the way, before you look at this and say, oh, but Kamala's up +1. All right, but which poll is this? And what does it compare to the historical trend? Because some polls lean more Democrat, some polls lean more Republican. Well, here's your answer to that question, if you're curious.
Across these 3 states, right? Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, an average on October 11th. What do you see? Well, if you look 8 years ago, Hillary Clinton was way out in front in an average of these 3. She was up by 8. You go 4 years ago, Joe Biden was up by an average of 7 points across these 3 Great Lake battleground states. You come today, it's just a 1-point advantage for Kamala Harris across these 3 Great Lake battleground states. So Kamala Harris, at least in the polling, is doing considerably worse than Biden or Clinton. And of course, Clinton lost in all 3 of these states, and Joe Biden barely won in all 3 of these states. So when you see Harris up by just a point across these 3, I think that this is really the type of thing that gets Democrats really to worry, John, because the simple fact is Kamala Harris is doing considerably worse than either Biden or Clinton was.
Yeah, at this number, what you start.
And that's not a statistic you want to see, okay? Because even if you want to run with the idea that polls are much more accurate than they were in 2020 and 2016, well, I don't know if that's necessarily true, but to some degree, you mean to tell me they magically fixed this overnight? All of a sudden, the polls are dead on? No, the truth, if we want to play it safe, is probably somewhere in the middle. So even if you meet in the middle here, it still means Kamala Harris is losing, because look at the difference. You're talking 7 points versus 1 point. That's a 6-point gap, 6 points down from where you were when Joe Biden won back in 2020. You mean to tell me all the polling methodology has magically flipped, not just in this one, but in all of the polls since the past 4 years? I don't necessarily buy it. So what's the ultimate conclusion? Folks, when you look at all of the intangibles, we are in the driver's seat. Donald Trump is the favorite to win this election. I firmly believe that. So what's the catch-22? What's the only thing that can stand in our way? It's turnout. That is it. That is what will decide this election. If enough of the Trump base shows up to the polls, either on election day, by mail, or before election day, any way you gotta get in your ballot, right? Then I firmly believe we will win this election. And that's avoiding any funny business. You know, Trump likes to use this saying, too big to rig. Of course, some of the MAGA base will be demoralized because of it. No. You're not listening to me, okay? Again, if enough of our base turns out, we got this, because at a certain level, you know, there's nothing you can do about it, truly. Okay, but with that said, that's why I feel like I say this every video. I'm a broken record by now, but complacency will be our worst nightmare, right? Make sure you are registered to vote. Some places it's already passed, unfortunately, but if the voter registration deadline is still open in your state, make sure you're registered. And secondly, more importantly, make sure you have a plan to vote. Make sure you know when you're going to do it, how you're going to do it, what your polling location is, etc. And make sure you go actually do it. Assuming all of the Trump supporters out there go and do that, I firmly believe, as you're seeing here, nothing will stand in our way between winning this election. But in order to do that, in order to make these poll numbers and stats and hype a reality, we have to show up on November 5th, and that's what's going to be the difference. And I'm going to stress that again and again until we finally get to that fateful day. And with that said, ladies and gentlemen, let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.